Welcome to another educational video. We're doing it on Thoughtseize today, so like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the video. For our first case of how to Thoughtseize, I want to draw your attention to this hand. So let's say this is your opener against, let's just say theoretically it's Burn. Maybe it's not Burn. It doesn't really matter. Any deck. Would you Thoughtseize on turn 1? Maybe, maybe not. There are definitely some arguments, but I believe that people are too quick to use their Thoughtseize. While you're looking at this hand, you see, 3 lands, a Liliana, 2 Fatal Pushes, and a Thoughtseize. Would you Thoughtseize? The reason I say people mess this up quite often is they will turn 1 Thoughtseize no matter what. There are definitely times when holding your Thoughtseize is for sure worth it. Let's say you're playing against a counterspell deck and you want to wait 1 turn because that Liliana the Veil is the card that's winning you the game. You have 2 dead Fatal Pushes, right? You want to be resolving this Liliana. You might as well as wait 1 more turn, right? There's no real rush. Against Burn, for example, you wouldn't even want to fetch Shock Thoughtseize. Let's say you're playing Juns, right? And this is your opener. You would not want to be using this Thoughtseize. There are very many situations where holding on to that Thoughtseize for at least 1 turn, especially when you have nothing else going on, that it is super important to hold on to the Thoughtseize. You need to be very patient with this card. Sometimes you want them to draw 1 more card to get 1 deeper to that counterspell that would win them the game if they counter your Liliana. So waiting that 1 turn is super important. And waiting for when Thoughtseize is actually going to be the most advantageous for you. People are very rushed with this card, very impatient, and you have to realize that to win more matches, you need to be more patient with some of your cards. Like, just waiting that 1 extra turn could be the difference between winning and losing a game. It's something very small, but very important. For our next point, I really want to focus on this turn cycle here. So this is turn 4 of this match. We are playing against a Lurrus companion. And I want to talk about companions in general with Thoughtseize here. So we're playing against a deck, and their hand is 2 Snapcaster Mages. That's irrelevant at this point. So we know that they have 2 Snapcaster Mages in their hand, and we have a Thoughtseize in our hand. So something someone might do is think, alright, why don't I just take one of those Snapcaster Mage, I can Drown and Lock the other one, and their hand is empty. Well, what I think a lot of people do, and this is a big mistake, is they would fire off this Thoughtseize here. So instead, I go to combat here, I go to attack, it's all good. They're going to play their Snapcaster Mage, we're fine to counterspell this one. And we are planning on saving our Thoughtseizes for when they buy this Lurrus. This is the most important thing you need to be doing with Thoughtseizes. So this turn, they could be holding up their other Snapcaster Mage because we do know that's in their hand. While they don't draw, they draw an expressive iteration here, I believe. They snap it off, and, they do expressive iteration things. They play a Mistress Bauble, they play a land, and they buy a Lurrus. So this is super important for every single companion matchup. There is no need to be in any rush, especially in the Lurrus mirrors, to fire off this Thoughtseize. So let's see, we'll go to the next play. We'll, surveil with our DRC, doesn't really matter, and we look at their hand. Great. So what we're doing here is, okay, I guess they didn't have a Snapcaster Mage. I'm mistaken. They have a Dress Down, whatever. They have a Lurrus. So this is the only thing that matters, right? Obviously we have the Drown and Lock, but only card that matters here is the Lurrus. So saving your Thoughtseizes for these important points in the game is something very huge, especially against companion matchups. Now, one where I would say it's a little bit less important is like Kahira, because the card's not particularly that strong. But for the case of Lurrus and Yorion, you typically want to save these Thoughtseizes for later on in the game, especially if you don't need to fire it off. We could have fired it off on that 1 turn, taken a random card that didn't matter, and probably, while we did draw the Drown Lock, we probably could have lost to this Lurrus in a game that we're very advantageous in. So that is something super important that you need to be doing with all companions, maybe a little bit less with Kahira and the other ones, but specifically for Lurrus and Yorion, you really need to be focusing on this point. Next, I want to talk about unique cases for when to Thoughtseize. So, as people know, Death Shadow is a card that matters about your life total. Tarmogoyf is a card that matters about your card types. Prowess and Scourge is also the same thing as Death Shadow, but Prowess is whenever you cast a spell, your creature gets a +1/+1. So something I've noticed that a lot of people are not particularly amazing at is finding lethal in certain situations. Where I think people go wrong with Thoughtseize is thinking too much of a card disadvantage situation, or even thinking about the cards like specifically as a discard outlet for your opponents. Now, against Belcher, sometimes that's a deck that's coming up currently in the metagame. They will bring in Leyline in a Sanctity, which makes them hexproof, which means you cannot use Thoughtseize on them. So you need to know in those situations where your Thoughtseize can potentially benefit you. For example, let's say your Tarmogoyf does not have enough types in the bin for like a presenting lethal for some reason, or your Death Shadow is too off from winning. You can always Thoughtseize yourself. These are very important situations. Now, while one that I should also have on here is Dragon Rage Channeler, because that is a card that matters about card types in the bin. These are all cards that really do matter about like very niche situations, but situations you need to know about. Just not thinking about your card as just specifically a removal or a discard spell is important. Thinking about the other uses of this card and potentially when you can win the game with this card. Sometimes you need to discard yourself with the Tarmogoyf to get 2 extra types, or even 1 extra type. Sometimes the Death Shadow, you're 2 off. These are situations I see people miss very often, and they're super important, and you just need to realize that that is one of the options. While it's not your best option or game plan 1, 2, like A, B, C, or D realistically, that is a game plan that you need to focus on. So that is something huge that I think a lot of people make for this with Thoughtseize as a mistake. Next thing you should be doing with Thoughtseize is taking cards that matter. So I wanted to pull up this example here. This is a great game, and honestly, this is a very good like demonstration right here. So first off, this is a time when you're going to turn one Thoughtseize. As you can see in my hand, I have a Mistress Bauble in the graveyard and a Bloodstained Mire, and look at the rest of my hand. Can't do anything here, so obviously we're going to Thoughtseize here. So when we're looking at this hand, we're looking at what is different here. So obviously there are actually 3 different, or honestly all of these spells are kind of different. One is a filtering card. You can put any number of cards on the bottom of your library and draw that many +1. Spikefield Hazard, which is important. It is a kill spell, not really for what our hand is contextually doing. And then we have a Planeswalker and a Blood Moon. So when you're looking at this hand, first off, you would almost never take the Spikefield Hazard, first of all, because our hand does not really matter about Spikefield Hazard. They can always hit the Croxa, which is kind of interesting. But, all of our 1-drops will get killed by the Blast Zone, which is in their hand, this is like something to think about. And then when we look at what we want to get rid of, we typically don't want to get rid of the filtering card, because unless their hand was really bad and it was maybe just like this and a Spikefield Hazard, maybe we'd take it. But looking at the rest of their hand, we only care about these 2 cards. Chandra Just to Kill, which is a very good Planeswalker, card advantage, and just overall is a big threat. And then Blood Moon is another problem. So when I think about what we want to be taking with Thoughtseize, you want to be taking the card that you actually cannot beat. Well, it's going to be difficult to beat Chandra Just to Kill. We actually can't beat Blood Moon. Our deck does not support enough sources for us to cast, first of all, our Croxa, our Death Shadow, we need to fetch Shock for this mana base for it to work, and we can't cast Lurrus because this deck only has 1 basic swamp. So when looking at something like this is a reason why you want to be taking Blood Moon. Nothing else in this hand even like remotely matters. Now, if I had a Ragman in hand, maybe, just maybe, you want to take the Spikefield Hazard, but with Blast Zone, I think it's an easy, based on our hand, this is a moment where you take Blood Moon. This is the card that matters, and this is what you need to be focusing on when Thoughtseizing. The final point that I really want to hit home with Thoughtseize is this example hand, another example one. So while identifying this hand, you really want to make things as awkward as possible when you are picking apart someone's hand. So as you can tell, you're looking at this hand. Let's just say you have 3 Dark Confidants in your hand, right? You might be like thinking in your head, let's take a removal spell, right? We have 3 Dark Confidants, we can push 1 through because we get to take one of these fatal pushes, or even the Lightning Bolt, because it's a little bit more versatile. Doesn't matter. Either one you want to take, maybe you take the Bolt because they have 2 fatal pushes, right? That could be reasonable. But what you really want to be doing with Thoughtseize is making the situation as humanly awkward as possible for your opponent. So while taking the Tarmogoyf while you have, let's say, an all-creature hand might seem a little strange, right? You want to make their hand very, very awkward. If they have these 3 removal spells, and you know they have 3 removal spells, let's just say you don't have to play into them. You get to hold your creatures and you get to wait. Maybe you draw, I don't know, a Liliana or some way to make them randomly or just discard a card like a Torok or something. Or even, I don't know, Liliana is a great example, right? Because then you're going to tick up and guess what? If you haven't played a single creature yet, they're going to start discarding these Fatal Pushes. You can hold on to these Dark Confidants. You can play them later on. Waiting and making them as awkward as possible is always what you want to be doing. Does not matter against what deck. Let's just say you're playing against, I don't know, a control deck, and they have really awkward mana, and one of their spells is a lot easier to cast on one turn or hold up the rest of the game. You might want to take that because you want to be making their hand super duper awkward and just like being able to play around it. Typically, it's really easy to do this with removal spells. Let's say let's say you're playing against a blue-white mage and they have, I don't know, a bunch of prismatic endings for whatever reason, and they only have 2 colors and you have a Liliana in your hand, or any 3-drop. Leaving those prismatic endings is fantastic, right? Because they literally have no lines of text against you at this juncture. While your hand might be good against these prismatic endings, like you have these Dark Confidants, really just trying to, like just make their hand awkward is just what you want to be doing. Thank you all very much for watching. Tell me if you really enjoyed the, switching, the commentary, just like doing this in general. I think a lot of people have commented and said they like this idea. If you don't, I would really appreciate it if you would comment, just maybe even give me new ideas. That'd be really appreciative. I do really enjoy doing these types of styles. It doesn't really matter what type of card it is. I will say I'm a little bit less knowledgeable in blue stuff specifically control-y, but I really do appreciate it. Thank you all for watching. Have a good one.